The dust of 40 horses and wagons hung in the desert air like a funeral shroud over the makeshift slave market beyond Santa Fe. November 15, 1882, a date that would sear itself into the soul of every witness. What happened that day would challenge everything decent people believed about humanity, and prove that sometimes salvation comes from the most broken places. Before we begin this extraordinary journey of courage and redemption, tell us in the comments what country you're watching from. We love connecting with our global community of viewers who believe in the power of human compassion. The sun blazed mercilessly down on the temporary auction platform where human beings were displayed like livestock. This wasn't supposed to happen in civilized territory, but corruption ran deep in these frontier lands where law existed only at the end of a gun barrel. Sheriff Martinez stood among the bidders, not as law enforcement but as a potential buyer, his badge tarnished by greed and racial hatred. Silas Thornton, the slave dealer, commanded the wooden platform with the confidence of a man who had never faced consequences for his evil. His voice carried across the crowd like the hiss of a serpent as he hawked human souls to the highest bidder. Distinguished gentlemen, he proclaimed with theatrical flourish, today we offer premium stock. Strong backs perfect for mining operations, ranch work, domestic service, whatever purposes you require. The assembled crowd consisted of the worst humanity had to offer. Hard-faced miners seeking disposable labor, ranchers wanting workers they could abuse without consequence, and others whose dark intentions were written clearly in their leering faces. They examined the captives like buyers inspecting horses, checking teeth and muscle tone, discussing their potential uses in voices that would haunt any decent person's nightmares. Most of the prisoners were Navajo, seized during recent military raids or captured by bounty hunters seeking easy profit. Men, women, even children, all shackled together and displayed like merchandise in a grotesque parody of commerce. The sight should have been illegal, but in this lawless corner of the territory, money spoke louder than morality. Then something extraordinary happened that would change 3 lives forever. Among the chained captives stood 2 young Navajo women who immediately commanded attention not through beauty, though they possessed that in abundance, but through something far more powerful. Dignity, courage, an unbreakable spirit that no amount of degradation could touch. They were clearly sisters, sharing the same high cheekbones, the same proud bearing despite their horrific circumstances. The elder, perhaps 24 years old, stood protectively in front of the younger, who could not have been more than 21. What struck every observer was their defiance. While other captives showed varying degrees of resignation or terror, these 2 women stood tall like desert flowers refusing to bend before the storm. "Ah, gentlemen, observe this exceptional pair," Thornton announced as he approached the sisters with the confidence of a man accustomed to treating humans like animals. 2 Navajo females in their prime, guaranteed workers who will serve you faithfully with proper motivation. His lewd emphasis on the word motivation drew crude laughter from the crowd, men whose appetites extended far beyond simple labor. The older sister's eyes burned with barely contained fury, while the younger maintained a grace that seemed almost supernatural. They had endured unspeakable horrors to reach this moment, yet somehow their spirits remained unbroken. Thornton continued his vile presentation, describing their physical attributes like a horse trader evaluating breeding stock. "Bidding starts at $60 for the pair," he called out, and immediately hands shot up around the crowd. 70, 85, 120. The numbers climbed with sickening speed as predators competed for their prizes. But watching this human tragedy unfold from the edge of the crowd stood a man whose presence would soon transform everything. Jack Rivers, 38 years old, a former Union cavalry officer whose weathered face told stories of battles fought and losses endured. He had come to town on routine business, never expecting to witness something that would shatter his world and rebuild it in ways he could never imagine. Jack had served with distinction during the Indian conflicts, fighting in engagements that still haunted his dreams with ghostly images of smoke and blood. He had lost his beloved wife Emma to tuberculosis 4 years earlier, and since then had lived in self-imposed isolation on his ranch in Devil's Canyon, trying to make peace with a past that refused to stay buried. He was a man hollowed out by grief, existing rather than living, going through the motions of life without feeling its warmth. But something about these 2 sisters struck him like lightning. Perhaps it was the memory of his own sister who died in childhood. Perhaps it was accumulated guilt over his role in conflicts that had torn apart native families. Or perhaps it was simply the fundamental wrongness of what he was witnessing. Human beings reduced to property in a land that claimed to value freedom above all else. The bidding continued to escalate with terrifying speed. 200 called out Ben Torres, a mine owner whose reputation for working employees to death was legendary throughout the territory. 225 came from Sam Bradley, a man whose treatment of women had made him notorious among decent folk. These weren't ranchers seeking honest workers. These were predators with the darkest of intentions, and their hunger was written clearly in their expressions. The older sister suddenly turned her head and locked eyes with Jack across the crowd. For one eternal moment, time seemed suspended as they stared at each other through the dust and chaos. What passed between them in that instant would be debated for years to come. It wasn't a plea for help, for this woman possessed too much pride to beg. It was something far more powerful, a challenge, a question that cut straight to the soul. Are you going to stand there and watch, or are you going to do something? The bidding war intensified with each call. 300 Bradley shouted, his voice thick with anticipation. The crowd fell silent at the enormous sum, more money than most territorial residents saw in 8 months. Thornton looked around expectantly, his greedy eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Going once, going twice. In that moment of suspended time, Jack Rivers faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. Every rational thought screamed at him to walk away, to avoid trouble, to protect himself. But something deeper than reason, something that had been sleeping in his soul since Emma's death, suddenly roared to life. 400, he heard himself say, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned crowd. Every head turned toward him like a single organism responding to an unexpected stimulus. Thornton's eyes lit up with pure greed while Bradley glared with the fury of a man being cheated of his prize. Well, well, Thornton said with a snake's grin, Jack Rivers enters the bidding. 400 from the gentleman in the back. The crowd began murmuring with excitement, sensing drama unfolding before their eyes. Bradley's face flushed red with anger and determination. 450, he snarled through gritted teeth. 500, Jack replied without hesitation, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening in his chest. 600, Bradley countered, his bid carrying the desperation of a man who had set his heart on a particular prize. The assembled crowd was now fully invested in this unexpected battle, their voices rising in anticipation. Jack looked again at the two sisters and saw the older one still watching him intently, trying to read his intentions, trying to understand what motivated this stranger to risk so much. 700, Jack said clearly, his voice cutting through the desert air like a blade. The crowd gasped collectively. It was an astronomical sum, more than many people earned in an entire year of backbreaking labor. Bradley looked as though he wanted to continue the fight, but even his considerable greed had its limits when faced with such an outrageous amount. Going once, going twice, sold, Thornton banged his gavel with theatrical enthusiasm. The Navajo sisters go to Mr. Rivers for $700. As Jack pushed through the crowd to complete this life-altering transaction, he could hear whispers following in his wake like smoke from a wildfire. What's Rivers want with 2 squaws? Thought he was still mourning his wife. Man's got particular tastes, I reckon. The crude speculation made his skin crawl, but he ignored it all and approached Thornton, who was practically vibrating with barely contained glee. Congratulations, Mr. Rivers, the slave dealer said with oily enthusiasm. Excellent choice. These 2 will serve you very well, I guarantee it. Jack handed over the money without speaking, then turned to face what he had just purchased. The words stuck in his throat like a poisoned barb. He had just bought 2 human beings. The fact that he had done it to save them from unimaginable fates didn't make the reality any less horrifying or morally complex. The sisters stood watching him with expressions that revealed nothing of their thoughts. The older one's chains had been unlocked from the main group, but her wrists remained bound with rough rope, as were her sisters. They were his property now in the eyes of the law, though the very concept made him physically ill. What are your names? He asked in the limited Navajo he remembered from his military service, his pronunciation clumsy but sincere. The older sister's eyes widened slightly in surprise at hearing her native language from this white stranger, but she remained silent, studying him with the wariness of a wild animal that had learned to fear human intentions. "I asked your names," he repeated in English, his voice gentle but persistent. "I am Iana Strongheart," the older sister finally replied, her voice steady despite the uncertainty of her situation. "This is my sister Nayeli." "Well, Iana and Nayeli," Jack said, the names feeling foreign but important on his tongue, "we have a long journey ahead of us." As they walked toward his wagon, Jack could feel the weight of curious stares and hear the murmur of speculation following their every step. Sheriff Martinez approached as Jack was helping the sisters into the wagon bed, his badge catching the harsh sunlight like a tarnished mirror. "Rivers," the sheriff said with a knowing smirk, "hope you understand what you're getting yourself into. Navajo women can be unpredictable creatures." "I can handle myself, Sheriff," Jack replied curtly, his patience for this conversation already exhausted. "Just remember, they're your property now according to territorial law. Anything happens, any trouble they cause, it falls squarely on your shoulders." The word property hit Jack like a physical blow, but he nodded and climbed onto the wagon seat without further comment. As they rolled out of Santa Fe, he caught Ayana's reflection in the side mirror. She was whispering urgently to her sister in Navajo, probably trying to determine what fate awaited them at the hands of this mysterious white man who had paid such an enormous sum for their lives. Jack couldn't blame them for being terrified. They had no way of knowing his intentions, no reason to trust that he might be different from the other men who had shown interest in purchasing them. For all they knew, he was simply a more successful predator who could afford to bid higher than his competition. They rode in tense silence for the first hour, the only sounds being the steady rhythm of wagon wheels on hard-packed earth and the occasional snort from the horses. The desert landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, red rocks and scrub brush painting a scene of magnificent desolation under the blazing New Mexico sun. Finally, Nayeli spoke up in hesitant English, her voice barely above a whisper. Where are you taking us?" Jack looked back at these two young women whose lives he had just purchased for $700 and made a decision that would change everything for all of them. "Home," he said simply, the word carrying more weight than he had intended. "I'm taking you home." He saw confusion flicker across their faces, but also something that might have been the first glimmer of hope they had felt in months. They didn't understand what he meant yet, but somehow the word home carried a promise that resonated in their hearts despite their fear. The Devil's Canyon Ranch sat in a valley surrounded by towering red stone cliffs that gave the place its distinctive name. It was a solid spread covering 3,000 acres of decent grazing land, anchored by a sturdy adobe house and all the outbuildings necessary for a working cattle operation. Jack had built it with Emma, dreaming of the family they would raise in this beautiful, isolated place. Now it felt too large and empty for one grieving man, echoing with memories of laughter that had been silenced forever. As they approached the house, Maria Santos emerged to investigate the unexpected arrival. Maria was a widow in her 50s who had worked as Jack's housekeeper for nearly 12 years, first alongside Emma and then helping him survive the dark years after her death. She took one look at the two Navajo women in the back of his wagon and crossed herself reflexively. "Dios mío, Señor Jack," she exclaimed in rapid Spanish, "what have you done?" "Something I should have done a long time ago," Jack replied, climbing down from the wagon with movements that betrayed his emotional exhaustion. Walking around to the back of the wagon, he reached up to help Ayana down. She hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing her options, then accepted his outstretched hand. Her skin felt warm despite the cool November air, and he could sense the strength in her grip, the coiled power of someone who had learned to survive against impossible odds. Nayeli proved more trusting, allowing him to lift her down without resistance, though her eyes never stopped moving, cataloging potential threats and escape routes with the practiced awareness of someone who had learned that danger could come from any direction at any moment. Both women stood uncertainly in his dusty yard, still bound and clearly unsure of what was expected of them in this strange new place. The setting sun painted the red cliffs in shades of gold and crimson, creating a backdrop of savage beauty that seemed to mock the human drama unfolding beneath it. "Maria," Jack said, turning to his trusted housekeeper, "could you prepare the guest rooms and perhaps find some proper clothes for our visitors?" "Visitors?" Maria's eyebrows shot up in surprise, her voice carrying a mixture of confusion and concern. "That's right, visitors," Jack confirmed, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to face Ayanna and Nayeli, who were watching this exchange with growing bewilderment. The concept of being treated as guests rather than property was so foreign to their recent experience that they struggled to process what they were hearing. "Let me make something absolutely clear," Jack said, looking each woman directly in the eyes with an intensity that demanded attention. "You are not my property. You are not my slaves. What happened in Santa Fe was an abomination, and I'm deeply sorry you had to endure it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a sharp knife, causing both women to tense instinctively, their bodies preparing for violence that seemed inevitable. But instead of threatening them, Jack moved to cut their bonds with gentle precision. "You are free to leave whenever you choose," he continued as he sliced through the rough ropes that had marked their wrists with angry red welts. "But if you decide to stay, you will be treated as members of this household with all the respect and dignity that entails." As the ropes fell away, Ayanna rubbed her chafed wrists and stared at Jack with an expression he couldn't interpret. Years of abuse and betrayal had taught her to be suspicious of kindness, especially from white men who seemed to offer something for nothing. "Why?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated suffering. "Why did you buy us if not to use us for your own purposes?" Jack paused, searching for words that could bridge the chasm of mistrust that separated them. "Because," he said finally, the words emerging from a place deep in his heart that he had thought permanently closed, "sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do." That night, as Jack sat in his study gazing out at the red cliffs illuminated by moonlight, he wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had just brought 2 Navajo women into his home in a territory where anti-Indian sentiment ran as deep as underground rivers. He had spent $700 he couldn't really afford, emptying his savings account on what many would consider an act of pure foolishness. And he had no idea whether his gesture would be appreciated, understood, or even believed. But when he thought about the alternative, about what would have happened to Ayanna and Nayeli if he hadn't intervened, he knew he had made the only choice he could live with. The question now was whether he could keep them safe in a world determined to destroy them, and whether they would ever be able to trust the man who had technically purchased them like cattle at market. Time would tell, but for the first time in 4 years, Jack felt like he had a purpose beyond simply existing from one empty day to the next. Something inside him that had died with Emma was stirring back to life, fragile as a new shoot pushing through winter soil. If this story of courage and redemption has moved you so far, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what country you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing these incredible tales of human triumph to viewers around the world. Jack woke before dawn as was his lifelong habit, but the house felt fundamentally different somehow. There were other people under his roof for the first time since Emma's death, and the knowledge sat strangely with him like clothes that didn't quite fit. As he made coffee in the pre-dawn darkness, he could hear quiet voices upstairs, Maria speaking in rapid Spanish mixed with broken Navajo, the sisters responding in hushed tones that carried the wariness of animals testing their environment. When Maria descended an hour later, her expression was deeply troubled, worry lines etched deeper than usual around her kind eyes. "Senor Jack," she said without preamble, "we need to talk seriously." "What's wrong?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Those girls, they have been through absolute hell," Maria replied, her voice heavy with sorrow. "The younger one, Nayeli, she barely speaks above a whisper. Won't discuss what happened to them before the auction, but her eyes tell stories that would break your heart." "And Ayanna?" Jack prompted, though he suspected he didn't want to hear the answer. Maria shook her head sadly. "That woman is like a cornered wolf, beautiful but deadly. She doesn't trust anyone, especially not a white man, no matter how kind his intentions might appear." "Can you blame her?" Jack asked quietly. "No, I cannot blame her at all," Maria agreed. "But Senor Jack, you need to understand exactly what you have gotten yourself into. They think this is some kind of elaborate trick, that you're waiting for them to lower their guard before you reveal your true intentions." The thought that these women saw him as just another threat made Jack's chest tighten with unexpected pain. "What can I do to convince them otherwise?" "Time, patience, and prayer," Maria said solemnly. maybe lots and lots of prayer. Jack was feeding the horses when Ayanna appeared at the stable door like a ghost materializing from shadows. She had changed into one of the dresses Maria had found for her, but she still moved with the fluid grace of a warrior, alert and ready for danger at any moment. "You speak some Navajo," she said without preamble, her directness catching him slightly off guard. "A little," Jack admitted. "I learned during my time in the cavalry, fighting in various conflicts throughout the territory." "You fought against my people," she stated, "and it wasn't a question." There was no point in denying what they both knew to be true. "Yes, I did," Jack replied honestly. "I participated in campaigns that I now deeply regret." "How many did you kill?" The bluntness of the question hit him like a physical blow, but he owed her complete honesty. "I don't know the exact number," Jack said after a long pause. "It was war, and men died on both sides. Women and children too, though I swear to you I never deliberately harmed non-combatants. Never." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth or simply crafting another lie to manipulate her emotions. "Why should I believe anything you say?" she asked, her voice carrying years of accumulated betrayal. "Because I'm telling you the truth, and because if I meant you harm, I wouldn't have bothered cutting your ropes last night," Jack replied. "I could have simply kept you bound and helpless if my intentions were evil." "Maybe you just prefer your victims to be willing participants," she shot back, the accusation hitting him like a slap across the face. The words stung, but Jack kept his voice calm and steady. "Maybe that's true," he said. "Or maybe I'm exactly what I told you I was last night. A man trying to do the right thing for once in his life." "And what exactly is the right thing, Jack Rivers?" she pressed. "What do you expect from us in return for your supposed kindness?" "Nothing," Jack said firmly. "I expect absolutely nothing from you except to be treated with the same basic respect I try to show you. Nothing more, nothing less. Respect." Ayanna laughed bitterly, the sound carrying no humor whatsoever. "You bought us like horses or cattle at a public auction. How exactly is that showing respect?" "It's not," Jack admitted painfully. "What happened in Santa Fe was fundamentally wrong, and I'm sorry you had to endure that humiliation. But I can't undo what's already been done. All I can do is try to make things right from this point forward." Ayanna was quiet for a moment, watching him brush down his horse with mechanical precision, studying his movements for signs of deception or hidden aggression. "My sister thinks you might be different from other white men we've encountered," she said finally, her voice softer but still guarded. "She's always been too trusting for her own good." "And what do you think?" Jack asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. "I think white men are exceptionally good at saying pretty words when it serves their purposes," she replied with brutal honesty. "Actions speak louder than words, and I'm still waiting to see what your actions really reveal about your character." "Fair enough," Jack acknowledged. He would have to prove himself through consistent behavior over time, not through speeches or promises that meant nothing without supporting evidence. "Where are you from originally?" he asked, changing the subject to less confrontational ground. "The Chuska Mountains," she replied, a note of longing entering her voice for the first time. "Our people lived there for generations before." She stopped herself mid-sentence. "Before what?" Jack prompted gently. "Before men like you decided we didn't belong there anymore," she finished, her voice hardening again with remembered pain. Over the next several days, a fragile routine began to develop within the household. Maria took charge of helping the sisters settle into their new environment, finding them appropriate clothing and showing them around the house and outbuildings. Nayeli, the younger sister, gradually began to open up, especially to Maria, whose maternal nature seemed to draw her out of her protective shell. Ayanna remained distant and deeply suspicious, but Jack caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking. She was evaluating him constantly, trying to figure out his true motives, waiting for him to reveal his real intentions beneath the facade of kindness. The first real test of this uneasy arrangement came on the 5th day when Sheriff Martinez rode up to the house accompanied by 2 deputies, their badges glinting in the harsh afternoon sun like warnings of trouble ahead. "Rivers," the sheriff called out as Jack stepped onto the front porch, We need to have ourselves a serious conversation. Jack could see Ayanna and Nayeli watching nervously from an upstairs window, and he hoped they couldn't sense the tension that immediately knotted his stomach at the sight of these unwelcome visitors. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Jack asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Got some disturbing reports about trouble with your new acquisitions," Martinez replied with a knowing smirk. "Neighbor claims he witnessed one of them attempting to steal chickens from his coop just yesterday morning." It was an obvious lie, and they both knew it perfectly well. Jack's nearest neighbor lived 6 miles away, and neither sister had left his property since their arrival. The accusation was simply a pretext for harassment and intimidation. "That's very interesting, Sheriff," Jack replied evenly, "considering that neither woman has been off my land since I brought them home." "You calling me a liar, Rivers?" Martinez asked, his hand moving unconsciously toward his gun belt. "I'm saying your information is completely incorrect," Jack replied, refusing to be baited into an argument that could escalate dangerously. Martinez's eyes narrowed with barely concealed hostility. "I'm going to need to search your property thoroughly," he announced. "Make absolutely sure you're keeping those savages under proper control like the law requires." "You have a warrant for that search?" Jack asked, knowing the answer but wanting to force the issue into the open. "Don't need no warrant for runaway property," Martinez replied with obvious satisfaction at his perceived legal advantage. "They're not runaway property," Jack said firmly. "They're my guests, staying here voluntarily." "Guests?" Martinez laughed harshly. "Is that what we're calling it nowadays?" Before Jack could formulate a response, Ayanna appeared on the porch beside him, moving so silently that he hadn't heard her approach despite listening carefully for any movement from inside the house. "Is there some kind of problem here, gentlemen?" she asked, her English clear and precisely articulated. Martinez looked her up and down with obvious distaste and barely concealed lust. "Well, well," he drawled, "the savage speaks English like a civilized person. How unexpectedly refined." Jack felt Ayanna tense beside him like a coiled spring, but her voice remained perfectly calm and controlled when she responded. "I speak 4 languages actually," she said with quiet dignity. "English, Spanish, Apache, and Navajo." "How many languages do you speak, Sheriff Martinez?" The sheriff's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger at being outmaneuvered intellectually by someone he considered racially inferior. "Watch your tongue, squaw," he snarled, "or you'll find yourself right back on that auction block where you belong." "That's quite enough," Jack said sharply, stepping forward to place himself between Martinez and Ayanna. "State your actual business here, or remove yourself from my property immediately." "My business is maintaining the peace in this territory," Martinez replied, his voice rising with indignation. "These Navajo have been conducting raids on ranches throughout the region, stealing cattle and murdering good Christian families. How do I know these 2 aren't gathering intelligence for their warrior friends?" "Because they've been here under my direct supervision since Wednesday afternoon," Jack replied. "Unless you're prepared to accuse me of actively aiding and abetting raiders, which would be a very serious charge indeed." The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke from a gunshot. Martinez might be corrupt and prejudiced, but he wasn't quite stupid enough to directly accuse a respected rancher without solid evidence to support such a claim. "Just keep them on a very tight leash, Rivers," the sheriff finally said, backing down from the confrontation. "Any trouble whatsoever and I'll hold you personally responsible for their actions." After the unwelcome visitors departed, kicking up dust clouds in their wake, Jack and Ayanna stood on the porch in silence for several long minutes, both processing what had just occurred. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice carrying a note he hadn't heard before. "For what exactly?" Jack asked, genuinely puzzled by her gratitude. "For not handing us over to them," she replied. "It would have been much easier for you to simply cooperate with their demands and avoid potential trouble." "I don't make decisions based on what's easiest," Jack said quietly. "I try to make them based on what's right." She looked at him with something that might have been the very beginning of respect, though her expression remained guarded and cautious. "Why did you really purchase us at that auction, Jack?" she asked, her voice carrying new intensity. And please don't tell me it was simply to do the right thing. Men don't spend $700 on complete strangers purely for the sake of righteousness. Jack had been asking himself the same question repeatedly for days, and he finally felt ready to articulate an honest answer. Because, he said slowly, choosing his words with great care, 4 years ago I lost everything that had ever mattered to me. My wife Emma, our unborn child, my sense of purpose and meaning in life. I've been existing like a dead man ever since, simply going through the motions of living without feeling any of its warmth or joy. He paused, gathering courage to continue with this unexpected confession. When I saw you and your sister standing on that platform, saw the way you maintained your dignity and pride despite everything that had been done to you, I recognized something I thought I had lost forever. What did you recognize? Ayanna asked softly, her hostility temporarily replaced by genuine curiosity. Hope, Jack replied simply. The possibility that broken things can somehow be repaired, that lost things can occasionally be found again, that maybe there's still some goodness left in this world worth protecting and nurturing. That evening, as the sun painted the red cliffs in shades of gold and crimson, Nayeli joined Jack on the front porch while Ayanna helped Maria prepare dinner in the kitchen. The younger sister had been gradually becoming more comfortable in his presence, though she still rarely spoke unless directly addressed. My sister doesn't trust easily, she said in her soft, musical voice, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. I've definitely noticed that, Jack replied with a slight smile. She has very good reasons for her caution, Nayeli continued, her expression growing serious. The men who captured us and held us before the auction, they were not kind to us in any way. The simple statement carried such a weight of pain and implied trauma that Jack felt his hands involuntarily clench into fists. The thought of these women suffering abuse made him physically ill with rage and helplessness. I'm deeply sorry that happened to you both, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ayanna protected me throughout our captivity, Nayeli continued. She always protects me, no matter what the cost to herself. But sometimes the things we must do to survive, they change us in ways that are difficult to heal. Jack looked at this remarkably wise young woman, barely out of her teens but speaking with the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had witnessed far too much of the world's casual cruelty. What do you want to do now, Nayeli? He asked gently. Where would you like to go from here? I honestly don't know, she admitted with refreshing honesty. Our people are scattered like leaves in the wind. Our village was completely destroyed in the raids. Some survivors went to the reservation, others fled south to Mexico. We have no family left alive except each other. Then stay here with me, Jack said without hesitation. Both of you for as long as you want or need to. Why would you want us here? She asked, genuine puzzlement in her voice. What do you gain from sheltering 2 displaced Navajo women? It was a completely fair question, and one Jack was still working to fully understand himself. Maybe I gain the opportunity to be a better man than I've been in the past, he said thoughtfully. Maybe I gain the chance to make some small amends for harm I've contributed to over the years. And maybe, Nayeli said with a small but genuine smile, we all gain something like a real family. The word family hit Jack with unexpected force, striking directly at the hollow place in his heart where Emma and their lost child had once lived. Family was something he had given up all hope of ever experiencing again, yet here was this remarkable young woman suggesting it might still be possible. That night, lying in his bed staring at the ceiling, Jack found himself thinking deeply about Nayeli's simple but profound observation. Was it truly possible? Could they really become some kind of unconventional family despite everything that divided them by race, culture, and painful history? The idea seemed both wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. From across the hallway, he could hear Ayanna and Nayeli talking quietly in Navajo, their voices carrying the musical cadences of their native language. He couldn't understand the words, but there was something deeply comforting about the sound of other voices in his house again, evidence of life and connection after years of echoing solitude. For the first time since Emma's death, Jack fell asleep feeling like he wasn't entirely alone in the world. But he knew the real challenges still lay ahead. Sheriff Martinez wouldn't be the last person to cause serious trouble over his decision to shelter the sisters, and he still had to prove to Ayanna that he was worthy of the trust she remained so reluctant to offer. The question that haunted him was whether he would be strong enough to protect them when the inevitable test came, because something deep in his bones told him it was approaching faster than any of them expected. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you're invested in this incredible story of courage and redemption. Tell us in the comments what you think will happen next, and what country you're watching from as we build our global community of viewers who believe in the power of human compassion. 3 weeks after the sisters' arrival, the real test arrived in dramatic fashion. Silas Thornton returned to Jack's ranch accompanied by 4 heavily armed men, their intentions written clearly in their hostile expressions and ready weapons. It was just after dawn when they rode into the yard, their horses snorting and stamping with nervous energy that reflected their riders' aggressive mood. Jack was in the barn tending to his animals when Maria came running from the house, her face pale with genuine terror. "Senor Jack," she gasped, barely able to catch her breath, "the slave trader has returned with gunmen. They look like they mean serious business this time." Jack's blood turned to ice in his veins. He grabbed his rifle from its resting place and headed quickly toward the house, where he could see Ayanna and Nayeli watching fearfully from an upstairs window, their faces pressed against the glass like trapped birds seeking escape. "Stay inside no matter what happens," he called up to them, his voice carrying more authority than he felt. "Don't come out under any circumstances until I tell you it's safe." Thornton sat comfortably on his horse in the middle of Jack's yard, grinning with the confidence of a man who held all the advantages. His 4 companions were clearly professional gunfighters, rough-looking men with the cold eyes and steady hands of killers who had survived by being faster and more ruthless than their opponents. "Rivers," Thornton called out with false cheerfulness, "hope you don't mind this unexpected early morning visit." "I do apologize for the inconvenience." "State your business clearly and then remove yourself from my property," Jack replied, keeping his rifle ready but not yet directly threatening. Now, there's no need for such hostility between business associates," Thornton continued with his oily charm. "I'm here regarding a rather complicated business matter that's recently come to my attention." "What kind of business matter?" Jack asked, though he suspected he already knew where this conversation was heading. "Well, it seems there's been a significant complaint filed about your recent purchase at our auction," Thornton explained with theatrical concern. "Turns out those Navajo girls you acquired belonged to someone else entirely. Prior legal claim, you might say." Jack kept his weapon ready while maintaining careful control over his voice and posture. "That's completely impossible," he replied. "You sold them to me in a legitimate public auction with dozens of witnesses present." "Ah, but here's where things become quite interesting," Thornton said, clearly enjoying his moment of perceived advantage. "It turns out I never actually had proper legal authority to sell them in the first place. You see, they were originally captured by a licensed bounty hunter named Ben Torres here, who was officially transporting them to a military detention facility for processing." He gestured toward one of his armed companions, a large, brutal-looking man whose eyes held the flat, dead expression of someone who had lost all capacity for human empathy. "They managed to escape during the transfer process," Thornton continued, "and I simply found them wandering lost in the desert, and naturally assumed they were unclaimed property available for sale. Perfectly understandable mistake under the circumstances, I'm sure you'll agree. It was an obvious lie constructed from whole cloth, and everyone present knew it. But it was exactly the kind of lie that could cause Jack serious legal trouble if the right corrupt officials chose to believe it and act upon it. Torres here has come to collect his legitimately captured property," Thornton announced, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Plus reasonable compensation for his time, trouble, and expenses incurred in tracking them down. Those women cost me considerable time and money to locate and recapture," Torres growled, his voice carrying the menace of barely restrained violence. "I want them returned immediately, plus $1,500 to cover my losses and inconvenience." It was pure extortion disguised as legal procedure. They clearly wanted the sisters back, probably to sell them again to even worse buyers, and they wanted to extract additional money from Jack in the process. "And if I refuse your generous offer?" Jack asked, playing for time while his mind raced through possible responses to this dangerous situation. "Well," Thornton replied with exaggerated sadness, "that would constitute theft of military prisoners, which is a very serious federal offense. Sheriff Martinez would be legally obligated to arrest you immediately. Terrible shame, really, for a man of your previously sterling reputation." At that critical moment, Ayanna appeared on the porch directly behind Jack. He had explicitly told her to remain inside, but she had never been someone who followed orders when her conscience dictated otherwise. "You're lying through your teeth," she said with calm dignity, her clear voice cutting through the morning air like a knife. "We were never military prisoners at any point." Torres's face immediately twisted with a combination of violent lust and murderous rage. "Shut your filthy mouth, squaw," he snarled, "before I shut it permanently for you." "Try it," Ayanna replied coolly, her hand moving with practiced speed to the knife Jack had given her for personal protection. The situation was escalating toward lethal violence with frightening speed. 5 heavily armed men against Jack, with 2 innocent women caught in the potential crossfire. The mathematics of survival looked extremely poor from any angle he considered. "Here's my counter-proposal," Jack said, his voice carrying deadly calm. "You have exactly 10 seconds to remove yourselves from my property before I start shooting, and I won't be aiming to wound." Thornton laughed with genuine amusement. "You're seriously outnumbered, Rivers," he pointed out with obvious satisfaction. "Be reasonable and nobody has to get hurt today." 5 seconds, Jack replied, raising his rifle to aim directly at Thornton's chest. "You can't possibly fight all of us and win," Thornton protested, though his confidence was beginning to waver slightly. "Try me," Jack said simply, his finger tightening on the trigger. For one terrifyingly tense moment, nobody moved a muscle. The morning air seemed to vibrate with the potential for explosive violence that could leave multiple people dead in the dust. Then the sound of rapidly approaching horses broke the deadly standoff like thunder splitting the silence. Dr. Williams, the town physician and one of the few genuinely decent men in the territory, rode into the yard accompanied by 2 men Jack immediately recognized as federal marshals. Their arrival shifted the entire balance of power in ways that made Thornton's face go pale with sudden concern. "Gentlemen," Dr. Williams called out with studied casualness, "I certainly hope I'm not interrupting anything particularly important here." Thornton's previous confidence evaporated like morning mist before the sun. Federal marshals possessed authority that trumped local corruption every single time, and everyone present understood the implications immediately. "Doctor," Jack said while keeping his rifle trained steadily on Thornton, "your timing is absolutely perfect." "Mr. Thornton," one of the marshals said in a flat, professional voice, "we've been actively searching for you throughout the territory." "For me?" Thornton asked with obviously forced surprise. "Whatever could you possibly want with a simple businessman like myself? Trafficking in illegal slavery, kidnapping, operating unlicensed auctions in violation of federal regulations," the marshal replied in the same emotionless tone. "You're under arrest by authority of the federal government." As the marshals efficiently took Thornton and his hired gunmen into custody, Jack finally allowed himself to breathe normally for the first time since the confrontation began. Dr. Williams dismounted and approached the porch with the relaxed manner of someone accustomed to dealing with dangerous situations. "Sorry it took so long to arrange this intervention," he said quietly once the prisoners were secured. "Had to ride all the way to Albuquerque to locate federal authority willing to act. Local law enforcement wouldn't touch this situation with a 10-foot pole." "How did you even know what was happening here?" Jack asked, genuinely puzzled by the fortunate timing. "Maria sent her nephew with a message," Dr. Williams explained with a slight smile. "That's one remarkably intelligent woman you have working for you." Jack looked toward the house where Maria stood in the doorway with an expression of deep satisfaction at seeing justice finally served. "I sent my cousin to find help the moment I saw those evil men approaching," she explained when Jack caught her eye. "These men, they carry darkness in their hearts that stains everything they touch." After the marshals departed with their prisoners, Dr. Williams remained for coffee and a more detailed examination of both sisters at Jack's request. What he discovered in terms of old injuries and trauma spoke eloquently of the violence and abuse they had endured before reaching the relative safety of the ranch. "They're remarkably strong women," he told Jack privately after completing his medical assessment. "But they've been through absolute hell, especially the younger one. She's been hurt in ways that will require considerable time and patience to heal properly." "What exactly do you mean by that?" Jack asked, though he suspected he didn't want to hear the specific details. The doctor's expression grew grim with professional concern. "Use your imagination, Jack, and then be prepared to exercise enormous patience with both of them. Trust doesn't come easily to people who have experienced the kind of systematic abuse these women have survived." That evening, as the sun set behind the red cliffs painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Ayanna found Jack sitting on the front porch, staring out at the landscape with the 1,000-yard stare of someone processing traumatic events. "Thank you," she said softly, taking the chair beside him without asking permission. "For what this time?" Jack asked, though he was beginning to understand the pattern of their conversations. "For standing up to those men when it would have been much safer and easier to simply hand us over to them," she replied. "For risking your own life to protect two women you barely know." "Anyone with basic human decency would have done exactly the same thing," Jack protested, uncomfortable with being praised for what he considered simple moral behavior. "No," Ayanna said firmly, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "They absolutely would not have. Most white men in this territory would have gladly handed us over to avoid any potential trouble with authorities." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky above the desert landscape that surrounded them on all sides. "Can I ask you something personal?" Ayanna said eventually, her voice carrying new vulnerability. "Of course," Jack replied, prepared for almost any question she might pose. "When you were a soldier fighting against my people in various campaigns, did you ever question whether what you were doing was morally right?" It was a difficult question that struck directly at the heart of Jack's accumulated guilt and regret over his military service. "Toward the end of my active duty, yes," he admitted after a long pause. "I gradually began to understand that we were fighting people who simply wanted to protect their homes and families from invasion. People who weren't fundamentally different from us in their basic desires and motivations." "What specifically changed your perspective?" she pressed, clearly wanting to understand the evolution of his thinking. "I met a Navajo warrior during a temporary ceasefire negotiation," Jack replied, the memory still vivid in his mind after all these years. "His name was Thomas Begay, and he spoke absolutely perfect English because he had been educated at a mission school as a child. We talked for hours about our respective families, our hopes for the future, our dreams of peace." He paused, gathering emotional strength to continue with this painful recollection. "I realized during that conversation that he wasn't a savage or a monster as I had been taught to believe," Jack continued. "He was simply a man trying to protect everything he loved from people who wanted to destroy his way of life. A father and husband and son, just like me." "What happened to him?" Ayanna asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the tragic answer. "He was killed in the very next battle," Jack replied, his voice heavy with old grief. "Shot down by one of my own men while attempting to surrender under a white flag of truce. That's when I truly understood the fundamental injustice of what we were doing." Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation about Jack's military experience and his evolving understanding of the conflicts he had participated in. "Is that why you chose to save us from that auction?" she asked finally. "Guilt over your past participation in violence against Native peoples?" "Partly, yes," Jack admitted honestly. "But also because it was simply the right thing to do, regardless of my personal history. And because," he hesitated, unsure whether to continue with this line of thought. "Because what?" she prompted gently. "Because both of you remind me that there's still genuine goodness in this world worth protecting," he said finally. "Worth fighting for, worth risking everything to preserve." The next morning brought an unexpected but wonderful surprise. Chief Robert Strongheart, a dignified Navajo leader known throughout the territory for his wisdom and diplomatic skills, rode into Jack's yard alone and completely unarmed, his approach signaling peaceful intentions. Ayanna and Nayeli rushed out to greet him with tears of joy streaming down their faces, clearly recognizing him as someone important from their past. "Father!" Nayeli cried out, throwing herself into his arms with the abandon of someone who had given up hope of ever seeing loved ones again. The chief spoke to his daughters rapidly in Navajo for several minutes, clearly getting updates on their experiences and current situation. Then he turned to Jack with curious but not unfriendly eyes, taking the measure of this white man who had purchased his daughter's freedom. "You are the rancher who bought my daughters at that abomination of an auction," he said, his English precise and formal. "Yes, but I freed them immediately upon bringing them home," Jack replied, wanting to make his intentions absolutely clear from the beginning. "So I have been told," Chief Strongheart acknowledged with a slight nod. "May I ask why you chose to intervene in their situation?" "Because no human being should ever be owned by another, regardless of race or circumstances," Jack said simply. The chief studied Jack's face carefully, as if reading the contents of his character through close observation of his expressions and body language. "You fought against our people in previous conflicts," he stated, and again it wasn't really a question. "I did, and I deeply regret my participation in those campaigns," Jack admitted without attempting to justify or excuse his past actions. "Yet now you risk everything to protect Navajo women at considerable personal cost," the chief observed. "This seems inconsistent with your previous behavior." "It's what any decent human being should do when confronted with obvious injustice," Jack replied, though he knew the answer was more complex than that simple statement suggested. "No," Chief Strongheart said with quiet authority, "it is what a genuinely good man chooses to do. There is a significant difference between the two concepts." The chief spent nearly an hour in private conversation with his daughters, speaking entirely in Navajo while Jack waited respectfully at a distance. When they finally concluded their discussion, he approached Jack again with an expression that had noticeably warmed. "My daughters wish to remain here with you," he announced, his voice carrying no judgment but considerable surprise. "Both of them have explicitly requested to stay, rather than return to what remains of our scattered people." "They're welcome to stay for as long as they choose," Jack replied immediately. "This is their home now if they want it to be. They tell me you have given them something they believed was lost forever," the chief continued, his weathered face showing traces of deep emotion. "What's that?" Jack asked, genuinely curious about their perspective on recent events. "Hope," Chief Strongheart replied simply. "Hope and the possibility of belonging somewhere safe." He paused for a moment, clearly making a decision of considerable importance. "I give you my blessing for this arrangement, Jack Rivers," he said formally. "But understand this clearly. If you ever betray their trust, if you ever cause them harm through action or neglect, I will come for you personally regardless of consequences." "I understand completely," Jack replied, recognizing the seriousness of the commitment he was accepting. "Good," the chief said with the first genuine smile Jack had seen from him. "Then welcome to our family, such as it now exists." As Chief Strongheart prepared to leave, mounting his horse with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback, Jack stood in his yard with Ayanna and Nayeli flanking him on either side. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten existed. A sense of belonging, of purpose, of connection to other human beings that transcended the artificial boundaries society tried to impose. "So," he said to the sisters as they watched the chief disappear into the shimmering heat of the desert, "what do we do now?" Ayanna smiled, and it was the first completely genuine, unguarded smile he had ever seen from her. "Now we build a real life together," she said with quiet confidence. "A genuine family based on choice rather than blood or circumstance." Nayeli took Jack's hand and squeezed it gently, her touch carrying warmth that seemed to flow directly into his long-frozen heart. "Home," she said simply, and somehow that single word contained everything that mattered. For the first time since Emma's death, Jack truly felt like he had come home again. Not to a place, but to a sense of connection and purpose that he had feared was lost forever. Spring arrived early in Devil's Canyon that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal and possibility that seemed to touch everything on the ranch with transformative power. 4 months had passed since the sisters came to live with Jack, and the changes in all their lives were nothing short of remarkable. The house that had felt like a tomb for 4 long years was now vibrantly alive with laughter, conversation, music, and all the small daily interactions that make a place feel like a true home rather than just a shelter from the world's harshness. Nayeli had blossomed like a desert flower after the first spring rain, her natural joy and optimism gradually overcoming the trauma of her recent experiences. Her English had improved dramatically through daily practice, and she had taken over much of the cooking responsibilities, introducing Navajo techniques and recipes that created the most flavorful and satisfying meals Jack had ever tasted. She sang while she worked, traditional songs in her native language that filled the house with music and hope. Ayanna had proven to possess an almost supernatural gift with horses and cattle, her traditional upbringing having taught her to read animal behavior and psychology in ways that amazed and impressed Jack daily. She could calm a spooked horse with nothing more than her voice and gentle touch, could spot illness or injury in cattle from incredible distances, and seemed to communicate with the animals on a level that transcended normal human understanding. More importantly, the protective walls she had built around her heart and emotions were slowly but steadily coming down, allowing glimpses of the remarkable woman she had always been beneath the necessary armor of survival. But it was the morning of April 20th that everything changed forever in ways none of them could have anticipated. Jack was working in the corral with a particularly difficult young stallion, trying to gentle the animal through patience and consistency rather than force, when Maria came running from the house with her face absolutely glowing with excitement and barely contained joy. "Senor Jack," she called out breathlessly, "come to the house immediately. There is news, incredible news that will change everything." Curious and slightly concerned by Maria's unusual behavior, Jack quickly secured the stallion and hurried toward the house, where he found Ayanna and Nayeli in the kitchen, both holding what appeared to be an official telegram and crying tears that seemed to combine joy, disbelief, and overwhelming relief. For a moment, Jack's heart stopped completely, his mind immediately jumping to the assumption that something terrible had happened to someone they cared about. "What's wrong?" he asked urgently, prepared to face whatever crisis had developed. "Nothing is wrong," Ayanna said through her tears, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Everything is incredibly, impossibly right for the first time in years. More right than we ever dared hope or dream," Nayeli added, her voice shaking with emotion as she handed Jack the telegram with trembling fingers. The official document was from a law firm in Washington, D.C., and as Jack read the contents, he could hardly believe what he was seeing printed on the yellowed paper. Ayanna and Nayeli's strong heart, the telegram read in the abbreviated style typical of such communications. "Stop. Regarding Navajo land rights settlement case. Stop. Your family's historical claim has been officially recognized by federal court decision. Stop. Compensation awarded for illegally seized ancestral lands. Stop. Amount $42,000. Stop. Please contact our office immediately to arrange transfer. Stop." Jack read the message twice, then a third time, hardly able to process the implications of what he was seeing. $42,000, he said aloud, his voice filled with amazement. "That's an absolute fortune, more money than most people see in several lifetimes. Our grandfather filed a legal claim more than 25 years ago," Ayanna explained, her voice still shaky with disbelief. "Before he died, he told us about the lawsuit, but we never believed anything would actually come of it. The federal government almost never honors Native American land claims, regardless of their legal merit. But they honored this one," Nayeli added, her voice filled with wonder and barely contained excitement. "We're actually wealthy now, Jack. Genuinely, independently wealthy." The full implications of this development hit Jack like a physical blow to the solar plexus. With that kind of money, the sisters could go absolutely anywhere, do anything they wanted. They could purchase their own ranch, live in luxury in any major city, travel to Europe, hire the best lawyers and doctors, never depend on anyone else for anything ever again. Most importantly, from Jack's perspective, they could leave him whenever they chose. The thought struck him with surprising force and unexpected pain. Over the past months, he had grown far more attached to Ayanna and Nayeli than he had fully admitted to himself or acknowledged consciously. They had become his family in every way that mattered, filling the horrible emptiness that had consumed his life since Emma's death. The idea of losing them now, just when he had learned to hope again, felt like facing another kind of death. "That's absolutely wonderful news," he managed to say, trying desperately to keep the sadness and fear out of his voice. "You'll be able to start completely fresh lives wherever you want to go, with whatever opportunities you choose to pursue." Ayanna looked at him sharply, her intuitive understanding of people immediately picking up on the undertones in his response. "This place isn't really your home," Jack protested, though the words felt like broken glass in his throat. "You only ended up here through terrible circumstances beyond anyone's control." "No," Ayanna said firmly, standing up from her chair with decisive authority. "We didn't end up here through random circumstance. We ended up here because one man possessed enough courage and compassion to risk everything to save us when the entire rest of the world had abandoned us to our fate." She moved closer to Jack, her dark eyes blazing with an intensity he had never seen before. "We ended up here because someone offered us genuine love and protection when the world had shown us nothing but cruelty and hatred for months," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But now you have real choices," Jack said desperately. "Meaningful alternatives and the freedom to make your own decisions about your futures." "You're absolutely right," Ayanna replied, her voice carrying new determination. "We do have choices for the first time in our adult lives. And I choose to stay here with the man I love more than life itself." The words hung in the air between them like lightning suspended in time. Love. She had said she loved him, openly and without reservation or qualification. "Ayanna," Jack began, but she cut him off with a gesture. "I love you, Jack Rivers," she declared with fierce conviction. "I've been trying to deny it for weeks, trying to convince myself it was just gratitude or emotional dependence or some kind of psychological confusion, but it's not any of those things. It's love, pure and simple and real." Her voice grew softer but no less intense as she continued. "I love your fundamental kindness, your quiet strength, your wounded heart that somehow still finds room for others despite everything you've suffered," she said. "I love the way you treat my sister like she's the most precious thing in the world. I love the man you've become through pain and loss and choosing to remain good despite it all." Nayeli was smiling through her tears, her joy at this development obvious and infectious. "And I love having a big brother who protects us and makes us feel safe and valued for the first time in our lives," she added. "Why would we possibly want to leave that behind for money and meaningless luxury?" Jack felt his own eyes filling with tears he had been holding back for months. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Really, truly certain? Because once we build this life together as a real family, I don't think I could survive losing you again. I've lost too much already." "Then don't lose us," Ayanna said, stepping even closer and taking his hands in hers. "Marry me, Jack Rivers. Make this family official and permanent and unbreakable." Jack had dreamed of hearing those words but had never believed they could become reality given everything that separated them by background, culture, and experience. "You want to marry me?" he asked in wonder. "Even knowing everything I've done, everything I've been, all the ways I've failed in the past?" "Especially because of everything you've been and done and survived," she replied with absolute conviction. "Your past made you into the man who could save us when we needed saving most. Your pain and loss made you capable of understanding ours in ways that let you help us heal." Jack looked at these two extraordinary women who had brought light and warmth and meaning back into his dark and empty world, and made the easiest decision of his entire life. "Yes," he said, pulling Ayanna into his arms while reaching out to include Nayeli in their embrace. "Yes, I'll marry you with all my heart. And both of you can stay here forever if that's what you truly want." "Actually," Nayeli said with a mischievous smile that transformed her entire face, "we have an even better idea about what to do with all that money." "What kind of idea?" Jack asked, intrigued by the excitement in her voice. "We want to use the settlement money to expand this ranch dramatically," Ayanna explained, her eyes shining with vision and possibility. "Buy more land, build additional houses, create something that can support not just our small family but many other people who desperately need help and hope." "What exactly do you mean by that?" Jack asked, though he was beginning to understand the scope of their ambitious dreams. A place where displaced native people can come when they have nowhere else to turn, Ayanna continued with growing enthusiasm. A working ranch that can provide jobs and homes and dignity for those who have lost everything to the expansion of white settlement. A bridge between our two worlds, Nayeli added, her voice filled with hope and determination. A place where people can learn to see past the artificial barriers that divide us and recognize our common humanity. The vision they were painting was both beautiful and incredibly dangerous. Such an enterprise would face enormous opposition from racist elements throughout the territory, people who would see it as a threat to their carefully maintained system of racial oppression. That would be extraordinarily risky, Jack warned them, wanting to make sure they understood the potential consequences. A lot of people would hate what we were trying to build and would do everything in their power to destroy it. Then we'll change their minds gradually, Nayeli said with quiet confidence. One person at a time, through example and persistence, just like you changed ours through patience and consistent kindness. 7 months later, on a crisp November morning with the red cliffs glowing like fire in the early sunlight, Jack and Ayanna were married in the valley below their expanded ranch. Chief Strongheart performed the traditional Navajo ceremony while Dr. Williams handled the legal requirements, creating a union that honored both cultures while transcending the limitations of either one alone. The guest list was small but profoundly meaningful. Maria and her extended family, several neighboring ranchers who had gradually come to respect their unusual household, and most importantly, a dozen native families who had already come to work and live on their expanded operation. As Jack watched Ayanna walking toward him in her white dress, with Nayeli serving as maid of honor and surrogate daughter, he marveled at how completely and wonderfully his life had been transformed. A year earlier, he had been a bitter, lonely, half-dead man simply waiting for the end. Now he was surrounded by family and love and purpose and hope for the future. Do you take this woman to be your wife, to love and honor and protect for the rest of your days? Dr. Williams asked with formal ceremony. I do, Jack said, looking into Ayanna's beautiful dark eyes and seeing his entire future reflected there. And do you take this man to be your husband, to love and honor in the traditions of both your peoples and in the face of whatever challenges may come? The doctor continued. I do, Ayanna replied, her voice strong and clear and filled with joy that seemed to illuminate the entire valley. As they kissed to seal their union, Jack heard cheering from their assembled guests and felt Nayeli's hand squeeze his arm with sisterly affection. This was what family felt like after years of emptiness. This was what home meant after so much loss and wandering. That evening, as their wedding celebration continued under a canopy of brilliant stars, Chief Strongheart approached Jack with an expression of deep satisfaction and approval. You have given my daughters something more precious than gold or land or money, the old chief said with quiet dignity. You have given them the chance to heal and grow and become the remarkable women they were always meant to be. They have given me exactly the same gift, Jack replied with complete honesty. The road ahead will not be easy, Chief Strongheart warned, his expression growing serious. There will be many who oppose what you are building here, who see it as a threat to their way of life and their assumptions about racial superiority. I know the challenges we'll face, Jack acknowledged. But we'll meet them together, as a family, and we'll never give up on the dream of creating something better. Yes, the old chief smiled with genuine warmth, together. That is the true Apache way, and it is becoming the river's way as well. As the celebration continued around them, Jack stood with his new wife and beloved sister-in-law, looking out at the ranch they were building together with love and determination and hope. They had started with a single act of rescue, one moment of compassion in a world too often ruled by cruelty and hatred. Now they were creating something that could outlast all of them, a place where love truly could triumph over prejudice, where different peoples could live and work together in harmony and mutual respect. It wasn't the life Jack had planned when he rode into Santa Fe that day 8 months earlier. It was infinitely better. It was a life worth living, worth protecting, worth passing on to future generations who would inherit a world slightly more just and compassionate because of choices made by ordinary people who decided to do extraordinary things. And it had all started with 3 simple words spoken from the heart. I'm taking you home. Sometimes the most important journeys in life begin with a single step of faith taken when everything seems hopeless. Sometimes family isn't determined by blood or birth, but by choice and commitment and shared dreams. And sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquering others, but from opening your heart wide enough to let others conquer you with their courage and love and unbreakable spirit. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of redemption and love on the harsh but beautiful frontier of the American West. If this story of chosen family and triumph over prejudice has touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another inspiring tale. Tell us in the comments what you thought of Jack's transformation from bitter, isolated soldier to loving family man and community builder. Share with us what country you're watching from as we continue building our global community of viewers who believe in the power of human compassion to overcome even the deepest divisions. Have you ever taken a life-changing risk to help a stranger in desperate need? We'd love to hear your own stories of courage and kindness in the comments below. Hit that like button if this story moved you, and please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that love really can conquer hate, that hope can triumph over despair, and that sometimes the most broken people become the strongest once they find their purpose in protecting and nurturing others. Subscribe now for more incredible Western tales of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds that make us truly human, regardless of the artificial boundaries society tries to impose between us.